Listening to the listening to the Veterans Truth Radio Network. Hey folks, welcome to Veterans Truth Radio Network. Veterans Truth Radio Network is listener supported, so we do ask you to go to veteranstruth.network.com and find that donate button on the right hand side of the website. You can donate through PayPal, or if you prefer to do a mail-in, that's fine too. Just go to contact and you'll find all of our contact information for Stu and myself. On behalf of Jim, Stu, and myself, and the rest of us here at Veterans Truth Radio Network, we thank you for your donation in advance. And now, on to the show. Listening to Veterans Truth Radio Network. And now, our feature presentation with your hosts, Scott Bennett and Michael J.
and gentlemen, this is Scott Bennett with co-host Michael J. and co-host Mr. Scarecrow on Fire Support Base Warthog, our first show up today. We're up and running, so hopefully everything's coming through sound. Mr. Chip Tatum is producing us. So hopefully everything is sounding clear. Wanted to thank everyone for being on board and be patient with us as we're still getting our sea legs and still learning the ins and outs of the technical issues and doing the countermeasures that are required when we start getting attacked and hacked and cyber attacked. But I wanted to start out by introducing and welcoming Mr. Michael J. and Mr. Scarecrow. Come on board and say hello.
Hey, brother.
Good evening.
Gentlemen, let me start out by saying a quick prayer so we're all under the same protection. Father in heaven, we come to you and thank you for this time. We thank you for this broadcast opportunity to speak truth and to be witnesses of your perfect will and knowledge. We pray for guidance. We pray for every word that's said in this show to accomplish your will and give you all glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Well, we're going to build up from what we had last week. We were talking last week of the 9/11 issue, the 9/11 occurrence, what happened in the September 11th attacks, the terrorist attacks that took down the New York buildings of the Trade Towers and the Pentagon and the big hole in Pennsylvania. We are re-examining that as the catalyst for what we have been subjected to 14 years later. And the purpose of going back in time and re-examining this whole issue and all the forensic evidence and the material is to heal ourselves now and to make whole and give us new insight and crystallize our intelligence and embolden our will and our righteous convictions so that we can act on this information now. We can act on it politically. We can act on it legally. We can act on it professionally. We can act on it religiously. We can act on it socially in our community spheres of influence. So everywhere that we exist on planet Earth, we can take this material, this information, and advance truth, advance justice, and honor, and expose the lies, the hypocrisy, the evil, the wickedness, the bad actions, the unconstitutional actions, the illegal actions, and the players, the people who did them, the people who conspired, the agencies that conspired, religious, government, military, and media. This is about truth. This is about getting to the truth regardless of the color, regardless of the religion, regardless of any characteristic or nationality. This is about getting to the truth and reclaiming it and then moving forward on it. So I just wanted to bring everyone back up to speed. And of course, we talk and present this as a military briefing. Mr. Michael J. and I have both served in the military, and this is being presented as a briefing to American military members to say, this is what we've discovered. This is why it's important. This is how you need to act upon it, because it affects you whether you know it or not. It affects your family whether you know it or not. It affects your oath as soldiers, as American patriots and citizens. And you have a duty, if you hold your oath to the Constitution seriously, as a member of the military, you have a duty to act on it. And action could simply mean praying about it. We're not advocating that people go out into the streets and do any major protests. We're not advocating stepping into a courtroom. If you don't feel called or empowered or gifted or whatever in certain areas, we're not calling you to that. We are calling every single person who hears this broadcast to pray about this, and prayer for our success. Prayer availeth much, and pray without ceasing. So every person who calls himself an American, calls himself a lover of truth, needs to pray for the success of this information getting out and influencing people for good, for truth, and for justice in our country. So that's the purpose. That's why we're doing it. We're not paid. Veterans Truth Network Radio is a voluntary donations organization, And I would highly encourage anyone, if you've been blessed and you have the ability to contribute, to donate money, to donate to Veterans Truth Network, because it is the only organization that has the guts and the intelligence and the willpower to take material like this and advance it forward. And it's Veterans Truth Network for a reason. There are strong-hearted military men behind this, but they need support. They need money to keep the electricity running so that this can continue getting to people. So I would just say, if you can give, it would be a blessing to you to donate to this organization to keep the power running. So I'll end it there, and I wanted to introduce Michael J., who's going to open us up with his briefing about what this show is going to be about, what we're looking to do with the 9/11 material, and how it's going to be necessary for our future political moves in this country. Michael, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Bennett. I'm very grateful and honored to be with veterans, to be with people that love the truth, to realize the blessing of what it means to be an American. This program is a gift. It's a gift that has come out of conviction. It's a gift that I believe was produced in prayer. This show is about manning an outpost, a virtual outpost. We call it a fire support base. We call it Fire Support Base Warthog because we consider that weapon system, the Fairchild A-10 Warthog close support aircraft, to be the epitome of an American combat ingenuity weapon system. There isn't anything on the battlefield that can handle the Warthog, no matter if it's a tank, any kind of armored vehicle. And that Warthog was cherished by the people at war because it went right down close to the ground to help people fighting the battle. And this is about getting into the battle. I want to acknowledge that when we learned, I grew up back east, when we learned about the citizen soldier, it was farmers who went to their homes, picked up their muskets, picked up their ammunition and their powder, and answered the call because it was about being an American. It was about understanding what was really at stake. And in this show, we want to make things really clear with respect to what the battle is about, where the battle lines are drawn. Each one of the people that we're communicating with understand that America is at war right now with terror. The reality is what we're discovering is that all the terror that we have ever been facing, and I'm talking about the terror I faced even in Vietnam, was financed by internationalists, and my government was complicit in sending me into that hellhole, not so that we could win, but so that internationalists could make billions of dollars by spending American taxpayer money on buying all the ammunition, the bombs, the bombers, the weapons, the aircraft carriers, and all of that, so that the military industrial complex could make money off of American blood. So what we're doing here in this fire support base is we're armed with stockpiles of truth. We've got ammunition of truth, and we're firing this truth into the American cyberspace and around the world because our nation is in war. And the real enemies are the people that have hijacked our government at every level of power. And they've chosen to use weapons of mass deception to bring our sovereign nation down into subservience to an internationalist gang of genocidal criminals. Anybody that looks at the truth is going to understand the reality of what we are truly facing as genocidal people have thrown American soldiers into the battlefield, into the lives of other people in other nations, and actually caused the death of hundreds of thousands of innocent people in the name of the American soldier, in the name of the American nation. And so that attack on 9/11, one of their most effective and deadly attacks, was a breach on the soul of this nation as a tactic of trauma-based mind control. It was a psychological operation. And because it put our nation into shock when America was in that shock of being attacked, that condition was utilized. It was exploited. And we were quickly subjected to huge and previously prepared multi-level programs designed to turn America into a total surveillance police state under the guise of fighting Islamic terrorists. And also, we were brought to a place where we activated the multi-trillion-dollar military-industrial complex in order to launch the American war machine against other innocent nations. Now, here's a quote from a man named John Whitehead, founder of the Rutherford Institute, and it's a partial description of a book he recently authored entitled Battlefield America, The War on the American People. And I quote here, "We've entered into a particularly dismal chapter in the American narrative, one that shifts us from a swashbuckling tale of adventure into a bone-chilling horror story. As I document in my new book, Battlefield America, The War on the American People, we the people have now come full circle from being held captive by the British police state to being held captive by the American police state. In between, we have charted a course from revolutionaries fighting for our independence and a free people establishing a new nation to pioneers and explorers braving the wilderness and expanding into new territories. Where we went wrong, however, was in allowing ourselves to become enthralled with and then held hostage by a military empire in bondage to the corporate state, the very definition of fascism. No longer would America hold the high moral ground as a champion of freedom and human rights. Instead, in pursuit of profit, our overlords succumbed to greed, took pleasure in inflicting pain, exported torture, and imported the machinery of war, transforming the American landscape into a battlefield complete with military personnel, tactics, and weaponry. In our program, we're going to encourage Americans, soldiers and civilians, to understand that we can, as groups of small groups of people, we can make a difference by bringing the truth out into the light and communicating this truth at a local level to raise the awareness and the level of understanding in those around us. Okay, brother, back to you.
Well, Mike, I like that. I like what we were discussing. And of course, we spent a lot of time gathering and really analyzing where we feel compelled to go, where we feel this needs to be led, the information, consolidating it, bringing it back together for people to understand. This is not just a subject. This is going back to a crime scene. This is going back to a horrendous act of treason,
yes,
a conspiracy that involves the deaths of American civilians and the tens of thousands of deaths of American military members, as well as the maiming and crippling and destruction of American military members, not even to mention the allied countrymen who served and the indigenous population of the people that have been ravaged by this whole war machine. So it's very important to face and cauterize this wound and cleanse it and draw out everything about it in order to build and use it as the cornerstone for building the reformation of this country, the renaissance of this country, the awakening of this country out of the stupor that it's fallen into for the past 25 years. I know it's longer than that, but I'll just break it down since after the Reagan administration, everything's went downhill. So I want to throw it up to Scarecrow and let you jump in and say what your thoughts are moving forward. You're the expert on the 9/11 encyclopedia of information, Mr. Scarecrow, because you were the one who introduced me to it. And I consider it an honor to have you on with us as a permanent consultant in the intelligence analysis that we're doing. So I'll hand it off to you and let you say where you think we need to go and what America needs from this information.
Well, America just needs to be informed, and they have been misinformed. And I brought up this last week. The entire scenario was built one lie on another lie, or as Jim Fetcher says, plots within plots. when he talks about unpeeling the 9/11 onion. Excellent article. This had been in the wings for a very long time. Early on, in the last days of George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 41, President 41, Wolfowitz had put a little paper together, and they came up with this idea that they wanted to take down 7 countries in 5 years, and they were all Muslim countries, so they could rule the Middle East. And they wanted America to do it. And they couldn't get President Clinton on board. He was too busy with Monica Lewinsky. We're not going to go into all that. Everybody knows well about that. But as soon as George Bush Jr. came in, they had a green light to just go ahead and do whatever they wanted. They convened an energy council. One of the first orders of business at the White House after Bush and Cheney were somewhat elected, and that's another fraudulent conspiracy story, which we're not going to get into that right now. The hanging chads, as we all know. They convened an energy commission and met with all the people at the White House with big timber, oil, gas, coal, and they came up with a plan. The trouble is they'd never released those minutes from that meeting. So they never shared that with the American people as what their ultimate goal would be. They were sued several years by the Sierra Club in particular, and they could get nowhere with it. So nobody knows what exactly was said, but we do know that this plan was hatched in the early days of Bush 43. And we're still living with the consequences of this, because that particular day changed our modern world forever. The way we think, the way we travel, literally everything. Everything. It's a trickle down into everything. The economy. And it's a crime scene.
That's right.
And it's not going to pay because
I'm sorry, brother.
They want
the land of the free and the home of the brave. We don't live in that same kind of country anymore, Van.
Yes, you're right, Michael. You're right. Yeah, exactly. The world has changed. And I don't think we can ever go back to the good old days, as they say, but we need to solve this crime and put it behind us so we may move forward.
Yeah, and that's the whole point. This is not a show that we've got going because we got nothing better to do. This is not about we like to hear our voice on the radio or see ourselves on our computer or that, we're getting paid. No, this is nothing but America and our duty as patriots. And we have a special duty, as people who've sworn an oath to the United States, because we've been empowered with a position of trust. We've had a sacred moment where we are essentially anyone who's raised their hands and sworn an oath to protect the country, to serve and uphold the Constitution. There's a sacredness. There's a metaphysical, eternal significance. It's almost like, that scene from The Lion King when the monkey holds up the little lion and the sun shines down on it. In a sense, when you raise your hand, the sun shines down on you and you feel you're being witnessed by God and the entire heavenlies and all of history and the long gray line of every military person who's ever died in service to this country. Their eyes are all upon you as you raise your hand and swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Not because it's a piece of paper worth saving, but because it represents the blood and the sacrifice and the hope and the honor, past, present, and future of America and what we were intended to be, what we were designed to be, what we agreed to be. And right. I did it in the military, and I also swore an oath when I was in the Bush administration, and I also swore an oath when I became a citizen of the country. So I've done it 3 times, and it's extremely significant to me. And what's driven me to sort of take the lead and be part of the show that starts to talk about this. And I was hesitant to do it, but it's that we have a duty. We have a patriotic act to share this with our fellow citizens. We have a duty to speak and help educate them and share with them our experiences. Now, Scarecrow and myself have a shared experience. We were thrown in the prison pit of Pharaoh's prison and met each other there. And in the darkness of that experience, formed a relationship where he, through that relationship, was able to come and say, Lieutenant Bennett, are you aware of this? Are you aware of that? Did you know about this? Did you know about that? And in coming to know this man, I trusted him and came to learn and study the material, and it was like scales fell from my eyes. And I began to look back on history and find out where I came from, what I did, how this whole thing was zippering up in a very fascinating way. And simultaneous to my conversations and relationship with Scarecrow was my relationships and conversations with the Swiss banker, Brad Birkenfeld from the Union Bank of Switzerland, who brought me all of the Swiss bank account information that I've come to learn. Not only was I trying to track down as a military analyst tracking financing of terrorism, not only did he give me all of that information in a divine alteration of destiny, in a divine intervention where God puts me in the place where I was given all that information from the whistleblower himself, not even to mention why I never got this in the military, in the capacity as a defense contractor for Booz Allen Hamilton. I had to go to prison to meet the man who held the skeleton key that unlocks all of these doors. And that's the reason why Hillary Clinton is running for the hills. That's the reason why Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer are running for the hills. Why Dov Zakheim and his son Roger Zakheim are running from the hills. Because all this was not made up. It just is exposing it and exposing the truth. And the men that I have around me are, one, they can confirm the legitimacy of all this, the legitimacy of the story. They lived it with me. But then bouncing it off people like Michael J., who are sources of experience from Vietnam, who've also got an accumulated library of information and experience that can be brought in to complement this. So the whole story is, for me, the Swiss banking nexus of the UBS, Brad Birkenfeld, Hillary Clinton, Obama connection to military threat financing operations, Booz Allen Hamilton threat financing operations, and discovering all that in prison. And in discovering that, we see the links to 9/11. We see the links to systems planning management that Dov Zakheim controlled. We see Dov Zakheim is the comptroller at the Pentagon. We see the auditors in the Pentagon that were killed on the 9/11 day. We see experts like Barbara Honegger and her wonderful work Behind the Smoke Curtain, which blows open the entire Pentagon attack as an obvious false flag event for anyone that takes the time to analyze the scientific evidence. And we see the others who are bringing in the information about 9/11 and the impacts on the World Trade Center, the Building 7 collapse, and Rebecca Roth and some of her revelations as a stewardess on how it was impossible for the official story to have taken place. So I'm gonna jump off and just say that's the purpose of all this, is to bring in the expertise and an ongoing conversation between Scarecrow, myself, and Michael J. with the Veterans Truth Network, the veterans that are listening to this program, the military members who are listening to this program, the oath keepers, anyone who's sworn an oath, whether you're in the police or the fireman ranks or anything like that. This is our conversation together to assimilate all of this 9/11 material and the terrorist financing and all that other material to bring it together and understand it to move forward. The website that we're slowly putting together and the documents that we're going to put on that website you can access by going to www.armypsyop, spelled ARMYPSYOP.wix.com/Scott Bennett. And the book is Shell Game by Scott Bennett. And that is simply used as a anchor point, as a cornerstone, as the center of the web from which all of this is going to be geometrically built upon. Because we have to build upon truth. We have to build upon experience. We have to build upon substance. And that is the substance, the concrete material that we have because we've lived it. We've been there. Scarecrow has lived it. I've lived it. And others who we will be adding to this call, not today, but in the very near future, will be men like the colonel who is known as Casino Man, the Army major who was an artilleryman who also was part of this conversation in the prison experience, and others. So I'll leave it there and jump off with the first thing we're going to do is recapsulate what we were discussing prior, which was the 9/11 attacks. And last week we got to basically relive the entire experience and what was happening moment by moment. And it was a very rich conversation because we were rediscovering everything that happened, the timetable that it happened, the parties that were responsible, and moment by moment identifying the impossibility of the official narrative and the very real proof of an obvious false flag, trumped up operation. So let me jump in there. Michael J., do you have something you want to say before we jump into kind of rediscovering all that?
Yes, I do. I mean, we need to understand that America has got generations of people still alive today who were betrayed. Okay, the Vietnam War was a false flag. Many of our people that went there are now dead, but it included the infections that were caused by Agent Orange. In the first Gulf War, we had infections caused by the Gulf War syndrome, which was a biowarfare weapon that was also exposed by Dr. Garth Nicholson. And in this war, we've allowed veterans to die on the waiting list to get the help they need. This is a betrayal of everything the real America stood for, because the people running the VA are the enemies of the soldiers. They do not care for the soldiers. And the soldiers are figuring it out because we've got somewhere around 30 plus people a day that are veterans that are killing themselves. We are at war, and we need to understand what it means. When a guy is wounded in the field, you don't leave him there. We need to call these veterans to a place where we can tell them we believe and understand what you're facing, and you're not facing it alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Scarecrow, chime in there.
Never before have we seen National Guard troops deployed 3 and 4 times in a war campaign. I mean, that's just crazy. National Guard are to guard the nation, not to go guard heroin in Afghanistan and guard oil fields in Iraq. I mean, these are your people that you need at home. I mean, America is deteriorating. Well, how many people could we use right now to fight the 100 fires out west? I mean, we had a Halliburton subsidiary suing American veterans because those veterans were poisoned by that Halliburton subsidiary while they were in Iraq. And this Halliburton Corporation wants to sue American veterans because they were accused rightfully of poisoning our soldiers while they were over there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes. Oh, Halliburton's behind so much of this. Well, it's Cheney's company.
Well, I want to say 2 things. One, for people who call in, who want to be part of the conversation, if you have something to add, if you have something that needs to be, included in this, if you're you're looking to move forward in this direction, you can call in, and the phone number is 352-678-3955. And I'll say it one more time. It's 352-678-3955. So that's for people to call in. If there's any, people calling in that are deemed to be, problematic in any way or have some sort of an agenda other than the expression of truth, then, you're not going to be part of the call. But this is for people who definitely, care and have something to contribute. Now let me jump right in to pick up where we left off last week, which was we were discussing the 9/11 attacks on the Twin Towers. We were first starting there before we jumped into the Pentagon. Now, Scarecrow, do you remember where we left off exactly in that conversation?
Boy, no, I don't. I'm sorry. I have some notes here, but no, I don't. I really don't. I know we talked about an interesting thing we brought up too was Stewart Airfield. I don't think many people are aware of that.
Yeah,
And
I think you maybe that's actually I think where we stopped off because it was.
I think we may have started to touch on this. Yes, and we can pick it up from there. This is a very interesting airfield. It was in New York State, and both of the planes that supposedly crashed into the towers both flew over a marker at this particular airfield at the exact same hour, minute, and second, which to me is really, really crazy. And another interesting thing about Stewart Airfield, the white plane that everybody talked about flying over the Pentagon and over D.C., it landed. It took off and landed from Stewart Airfield too. I don't know. How could that be a coincidence? You have three planes involved in a crime scene, and they're all tied into one small airfield called Stewart Air Force Base in New York, not far from New York City.
Now we're going to keep on that subject. We're going to keep and build from the Stewart Airfield and the planes taking off and then crashing into the building supposedly. The Rebecca Roth book, Methodical Illusion, I think is a very interesting one, and it begins to identify some of the weirdness that's associated with the phone calls that were made from the plane. Rebecca Roth's Methodical Illusion, and she will be playing an increasing role in discovering this. Her book basically summarizes the story as the planes were landed at the airfield. A few people were taken off the plane to participate in this, quote, drill, and the people on the plane were killed. The people on the plane were gassed with a cyanide gas. And the people taken off the plane then made these phone calls to their parents, to their FAA, various people, and those phone calls deviated from the training that stewardesses and everyone in the airline industry goes through. And anyone who's worked in the airline industry, as a plane pilot, as a captain, as a member of the crew, understands that they go through military training. They are trained in a military capacity because life and death is at stake. You're in an airplane 30,000 feet up in the air. The last thing you want is someone going crazy or doing something stupid. So you run that like a very tight ship. You're running the plane like prison guards. Nobody gets out of their seat. Nobody misbehaves. Yes, you do it with charm and charisma, but you also have an iron fist. So Rebecca Roth is experienced in that. And I have family members who were pilots in the professional airline industry who confirm all of that. So it's right on the money. But what's most disturbing is we follow that the planes were theoretically landed at this airfield. Some people were taken off. The rest were killed. One of the people identified in that story was a Israeli special operations person who was supposedly killed, but most likely he's alive and was part of this operation. The people who were taken off the plane, according to Rebecca Roth's material, made phone calls, which is impossible to do in a plane at 30,000 feet. The stewardesses made statements that were contradictory to their training, and they seemed to embed their communication with clear tells of false flag or drill operations. And you could hear in the background voices coaching these individuals to give their statement, to give their talk, coaching the individual, saying, "You're doing very well," or "That's very good." And individuals, go ahead.
And Rebecca, she said what really tipped her is when she heard the one attendant say, "We just went up the stairs."
Right.
Up what stairs? There was not a stairwell. There was not an upper deck on this particular model aircraft. There were no steps to ascend or descend unless you're going on the plane or off the plane. And this is a plane that's in midair.
That's right. That's right.
And, and clearly they said, "Hey, we just came up the stairs and we're making these statements."
So what probably happened is the planes landed at this airbase, and then military planes were then taken off and flown at very high speeds that make it impossible for a civilian plane to have flown. Most likely planes that were remote controlled.
SMC Corporation. Yeah, we can thank Mr. Zackheim for maybe some of that.
Yeah, so Dov Zackheim, who was representing or a CEO of the remote control plane technology company, and also selling and gathering planes and sending them to MacDill Air Force Base, which is one of the reasons I went down.
35 tanker planes in an agreement with a leasing agreement with Boeing. And they were the same model, I think 767.
Right.
But they had fewer windows on the planes because they could haul fuel and passengers, jump flights for military people. But basically the same aircraft, just fitted with fueling capability.
Right.
Yeah, behind that 30. There were 35 planes, and they were sent to Florida.
Well, they were sent to MacDill Air Force Base, which is where I was. That was my base that I was positioned at. So Dov Zackheim comes into play. So these planes were taken off, and another good thing to remember is that AWACS quote, can spoof radar to report what they want, including positions. So that's exactly right.
They were playing war games. All that day was set up for. I've heard anywhere from 8 to 17, and I'm not going to say I don't know.
So they were using smoke. They set up smoke grenades.
Numerous war games, and George Bush had signed an executive order in May of 2001 giving Dick Cheney charge of all war games. So there's no doubt who was running the show, and I'm pretty sure his code name was Maestro, and it was Mr. Cheney.
Now let's flash forward. And these planes are taken off. They're military aircraft, and they're flying at 500 miles an hour at very low altitude, which is impossible for a civilian plane to do. They don't have the structural integrity. And you see on the video footage supposed bulges on the bottom of the fuselage, which military planes have. So, and they're gray looking in color, so they seem to be military. But
there were also witnesses in New York, particularly with the second plane, that said it did not look like a typical airliner because it was, the thing they said were the lack of windows.
Yes.
And then again, the tanker model does, I don't know the exact number of windows, but there are far fewer windows.
Yes.
But there are some, but not that many.
Yeah.
Like a commercial jet where everybody wants to get a window seat.
Yeah. So
that they were more drab in color, which that to me says military.
Yeah, that's right. The KC.
The fact that Dov is behind the agreement is just amazing. How many times he can pop up in this story?
Well, we're gonna pop him up. I don't want to jump ahead of the thing, but we're gonna pop him up a few times. But let's continue with the general narrative of these planes now are speeding towards the buildings, and now you've got people with cameras on the street with their cameras facing up into the sky, looking for the planes. And it's also come that Susan Lindauer, a great asset of intelligence and experience, she was on the phone with her CIA boss, who told her, quote, only Mossad agents would be there with their video cameras ready to record planes flying at that high speed crashing into the buildings. That was not a random tourist. That was not a random New Yorker. Those were Mossad agents specifically placed to capture the video of the planes crashing into the building. And then when he told her that, and afterwards she was outraged and talked to him later, and he said, quote, Susan, we can never talk about that again. We can never talk about Mossad agents on the ground with video cameras recording the planes crashing into the buildings. So Mossad and the Israeli connection is plainly identified by the CIA handler and boss and high-level employee of the Bush administration. They clearly stated that it was a Mossad Israeli operation, in at least because they knew it was happening. They sent out a message via their text messaging system to all the Israeli Jewish people who worked in the World Trade Center. Supposedly 4,000 of them never came to work that day.
No, avoid that area at all costs.
So they knew, her boss knew, CIA knew, or they were playing and planning and participating in it, that it was an Israeli operation. Never mind the 5 dancing Israelis who were videotaping it from New Jersey from a van that was stopped later on, which was later identified as Mossad agents that Michael Chertoff, who was the Attorney General, I believe, at the time, or in the Department of Justice at the time, or something. Michael Chertoff was Department of Justice. He enabled those 5 dancing Israelis to not be held, not be questioned, not be interrogated, not kept into a holding prison for 6 months or a year like they do to some people who they have no charges on. They just hold them. No, he didn't do any of that. He sent them right back to Israel as soon as he could. And that's where they got, so they couldn't be questioned. So this whole thing with the Mossad Israeli connection is connected to the 5 dancing Israelis and the people on the ground with a camera. But the next thing we know is the planes crash into the building and in a fireball explosion blow up. Now, most of that fuel in the planes, architects and engineers and everyone who knows aircraft have said all the fuel would have blown up in that initial explosion. And all the fuel that blew up was no longer capable of significantly burning any material inside the World Trade Center to a point where it could melt steel and collapse the floors. So the architects and the engineers and the scientists have said the planes crashing into the building could not have caused the structural damage to cause the buildings to collapse on themselves.
No, because there were 44 steel columns at the core of that building. There's no way that plane could have even remotely gotten close to those 44 columns.
Especially since the buildings were designed with the intention that if a plane crashed into it, it would not have a destructive effect.
I brought this up last week. I'm a photographer. I have been for years. I was in New York. I photographed these buildings. I was in them, on them, around them. And there's no way They were built with a steel skin around the outside of that building for the very reason the architect built that building that way, because they had a plane fly into the Empire State Building. Granted, it wasn't as big, but they knew that possibility existed. So they built them to withstand a plane crash.
So the next thing I want to jump into, I want to get into the Judy Wood material, and before I jump into that, Michael J's going to have a few words on it because he's the expert, and I know Scarecrow is too on some of her materials. But let me just give a briefing because we're coming up to the 5 o'clock point, and we're going to have a few minutes before it starts up again. But before we get into the second half, in which we start discussing Judy Wood's material and her explanations and analysis of the science behind the World Trade Center fall that corroborates the structural analysis by the architects and engineers that also is corroborated by some of the other experts. It looks at,
Jones.
Yeah. The planes, we're just going to paint a very quick scenario. So these planes crash into the buildings. There's a big fireball. Next thing you know, time is going by, and all these people are hanging out the windows, hanging out the sides of the buildings. Some of them start jumping out of the buildings. Some of them start, because of the high heat. Next thing you see videotape footage of what looks to be raw red molten metal pouring out of the sides of the buildings. So, there's some red metal material that's coming out. And next thing you know, you have, and by the way, I want to flash forward. Remember, George W. Bush is in Florida at the time, and it came out later that he saw, quote, he said that he saw the first plane fly into the first building. Now you need to make that an anchor, a cornerstone of his deception, because we all know he's dumb as a bag of rocks, but he said, I saw the plane fly into the first building and I thought they were a poor pilot. Well, that is absolutely impossible to say because no video footage existed. The only way that he could have seen that video footage is if it was recorded and sent to him by a private intelligence source.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why he was moved to Florida, because Cheney was in charge of the operation and they knew he would screw it up. And he did. I mean, he was supposed to go down there and read the book, The Pet Goat, and keep his mouth shut and stay out of the way. And he couldn't even do that.
So let me flash forward. So he let it out of the bag right there. But now we've got the human drama. We have people falling to the ground, jumping to the ground, red metal pouring out of the building. We've got firemen and police rushing up, sworn to do their duty and an oath to the country, rushing up to save the building. And one fireman says, I can put this fire down, send me up another hose. And moments after that, the building collapses into a dust cloud. Not a bunch of building chunks of cement, not a building being demolished, but it turns into a big chalk dusty cloud where every solid piece of bathtub, toilet, porcelain, metal, everything is vaporized, turned into dust, however you want to define it, and it disappears.
It's the first time in history a building has caught on fire and turned to powder. And it happened twice on the same day. Never in the history of architecture has this ever happened before. And I think the one building burned in 58 minutes. The jet fuel, it's insane.
Now, the other significant thing is the seismologists have indicated no seismic activity was recorded that should have been recorded if a building of that size had collapsed in on itself from a fall or demolition. It just didn't show up. And they've got the proof where other buildings that were demolished in various points in time, there's always been a recorded seismic activity. And in this event, no seismic activity was recorded regarding the fall of the largest buildings in the country with the most mass, nothing. And most of that mass evaporated into cloudy smoke and disappeared. But we'll
they didn't collapse; they were pulverized. And Scotty, let me just piggyback in on you just a second.
Yeah.
I know we're getting ready to go to break. There were two recordings, supposedly when the planes hit the buildings. And Columbia University did the study on this. But
5 seconds. 5 seconds. We're going to have to come back to it. We'll see
okay. Let me stop when we come back, and
Right.
this is interesting too.
Okay, pal. We'll see you soon. Come back after the break.
Okay, got it.
When the days are cold and the cards all fold and the saints we see are all made of gold, when your dreams all fail and the ones we hail are the worst of all and the bloods run stale, I wanna hide the truth, I wanna shelter you, but with the beast inside nowhere we can hide.
You're listening to Veterans Truth Radio Network, and as always, folks, we're chasing those demons.
This is my kingdom come. This is my kingdom come. When you pull my heat, look into my eyes. It's where my demons hide. It's where my demons hide. Don't get too close. It's dark inside.
I used to bite my tongue and hold my breath, scared to rock the boat and make a mess. So I said quietly, agreed politely. I guess that I forgot I had a choice. I let you push me past the breaking point. I stood for nothing, so I fell for everything. You held me down, but I got up, already brushing off the dust. You hear my voice, you hear that sound, like thunder gonna shake the ground. You held me down, but I got up. Get ready, 'cause I've had enough. I see it all, I see it now.
Welcome, and now, here's your host.
I got the eye of the tiger, fire, dancing through the fire. 'Cause I am a champion, and you're gonna hear me roar louder, louder than a lion. 'Cause I am.
Well, we are back once again for part two. For the next hour, we are going to be continuing the briefing on the 9/11 material, the source information, the evidence, everything that's known so far about the attacks on the World Trade Center, the attacks on the Pentagon, and the fall of the Building 7, Solomon Building, and all of the related material, all the related parties from 9/11, September 11th, 2001 until present. We are doing a briefing on what we know so that we can prepare the battle space of what we do with that today, and tomorrow, because we as Americans and our nation has been radically changed and altered and politically and legally, given an entire facelift, since 2001. And that facelift has really desecrated the original image of beauty, which our founding fathers and Ronald Reagan and all the great men, I think, of this country originally envisioned. But we have undergone a radical surgical alteration of our constitutional liberties, of our self-identity as Americans, and as the world has identified us. The world looks at us now as a monstrous, mongoloid, drunk sociopath that is on an absolute destructive conquest throughout the Middle East. And now we're looking with designs on Syria and Russia and the Chinese Pacific theater. So all of these nations are looking at us as if we're doing a last desperate, gasping death grip thrash about, like Rome in its last days. We are going through this last ditch effort to conquer every area of ground and attack every country that seems to oppose us with, I think, a suicidal effect. I think if we allow this to continue, this country is going to implode on itself, not only in a domestic firestorm of civic unrest, as we already see, kind of spread in the country, but with international condemnation. And Europe is soon to condemn us, I think, because of the human tragedy and tsunami of refugees that is flooding Macedonia and Italy and France and the United Kingdom and Sweden, who I think are about as stupid as you could come with some of their policies, but they are probably going to be absolutely the first country that's overwhelmed with acts of terrorism, just because they've got so many ungrateful terrorists that are now filling into their country and trying to change it in accordance with their religious ambitions for recultivating Swedish society. I won't go on that rabbit trail right now, but I'll start off again with Scarecrow. We were talking about the 9/11 planes crashing into the buildings falling down, and some very weird aberrations of science.
So
Why don't you pick it up?
Yeah, the unusual scenario that Jim Fetzer brings up, and you can check Jim out on Veterans Truth Network. He has many good articles, and I highly recommend anybody to take a look. He's also the founder of Scholars for 9/11 Truth. But take a look at what he says, and a couple of posts I think he put up on July 28th or 29th. The 9/11, Unpeeling the Onion, Plots Within Plots, is the one post. And within there, I think Columbia University registered some explosions when the initial planes supposedly hit the building. But the problem is there's a gap with the plane and the explosion. The one building, the one plane, and I'm not sure which one's which, is irrelevant. They're both off. And one's off by 14 seconds, the other one is 17 seconds. And you say that's not a big deal. But it is when a plane hits a building.
Yeah.
14 seconds, 17 seconds, that is a big deal. And they were both off. These explosions were off. So the demolition crews were not timed exactly with the plane.
Yeah. So,
and
Jim brings, I want to pick up.
Really, and then again, the buildings turned to powder.
Yeah. And that's where I want to pick up, is looking over the powder
Wood.
of the buildings. Yeah, I'm going to get into Judy Wood for the next half hour, and then we're going to get into the Pentagon. But let me start off the Judy Wood conversation and her material with Michael J. and let you chime in, Mike, on how Judy Wood and her work is absolutely, significant to this whole thing.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Before that, I want to say that the number to call in, because we're encouraging people to participate in this dialogue, because everybody out there that believes in the America we want to defend, the America that we want to restore, the America that we believe in, that's not run by a bunch of psychopaths. This is your show. This is your fire support base. We are your servants standing in the gap. And the number here is 352-678-3955. 352-678-3955. This is Michael J. and Lieutenant Bennett and Scarecrow, our brother Van. And we're grateful that we're here because we believe America is worth fighting for. Now, concerning these things that happened with respect to 9/11 and the research that's gone on, I want to point out that this was the second attempt to blow up the World Trade Center. The FBI was involved in the first one. They should have prevented it, but they actually gave them what they needed, including real blasting caps, to do an attack in the basement of the World Trade Center. And this also points out the fact that our government was involved in the Alpha P. Murrah building and trying to bring that down. You certainly couldn't bring down a building that had 12 and 16-inch steel reinforced concrete supports throughout with an air blast explosion. But they went in there after the initial blast, and they had to evacuate the Alpha P. Murrah building after a short time because they found unexploded United States military ordnance in their stairwells that had failed to blow up. So America, it seems, the people running the show, has developed a habit of blowing up their own buildings, having their own, what was the name of that building, Scott, that they did in Germany to start World War II?
Oh yeah, the Reichstag.
The Reichstag. We had our own Reichstag. And hey, let's not forget the fact that the government had all the United States Navy personnel in the first Pearl Harbor open up all the watertight doors the night before to make sure those battleships blew up, because they had big contracts for shipbuilding in America, and they wanted to get rid of those old ships and get America into World War II. They knew that attack was coming 2 weeks earlier and blamed it on Admirals Kimmel and Short. Amen?
Yeah.
So the reality is what we're looking at is in this generation, there are enough people that are truth tellers, whistleblowers who understand, this deceitful sleight of hand, and a woman with 3 degrees in engineering plus a professorship that went, I think, more than 20 years, had the opportunity to see those buildings come down on television while she was at school. And she looked at that and said, that is not possible with what they are saying. That's Dr. Judy Wood. And everybody can go on YouTube and put in where did the towers go and get an earful of this amazing technology. And our brother, Lieutenant Bennett, he's got a book. It's like 2 inches thick, filled with a wonderful scientific information that absolutely proves that this building was brought down by what she called a free energy weapon, because it was the kind of weapon that actually brought about the disintegration of the molecules. And that's why people were leaping out of the building, because they were being cooked. Yeah. And brother, I'm turning it over to you.
Yeah, that's precisely right, Michael J. And the book that I'm reading was given to me on loan by Michael J., which has been an astounding revelation. And I'm coming up again, sort of behind the 8 ball from a lot of these experts who've done the homework, but I'm indebted to their experience and knowledge and groundbreaking in this. I represent the military officer of today, the young man under their 50s who's been in Afghanistan, who's been in Iraq, and has now discovered that it was all based on lies. And I'm the model that every young military man and woman needs to follow, to have the courage to look at the truth, have the courage to keep their eyes open, and then incorporate that truth into their oath, into their duty, into their service to country, because we are discovering that the entire thing was built on a lie, was a false flag operation, and that was used to open up a global crusade that has destroyed the reputation of this country. And the only hope is to get these wild horses under control, to remove from office the senile old men who are in positions of power, John McCain, Lindsey Graham. I can go on and on and on and on about all the congressmen and senators who've been made known about this, but they all need to be removed and challenged. And this is the mechanism to remove them. This is the can opener. This is the shut.
They were all sworn in.
They all swore an oath to the Constitution. And
that's right.
Not only are they committing treason by not doing anything with this information, but an easier charge is misprision of felony. They were informed that felonies were being committed by me, Scott Bennett, Lieutenant, United States Army. They were informed in an official Army whistleblowing report that felonies were being committed. Not only felonies, but treason against our fellow military officers, military enlisted. And they have done nothing. They covered it up.
Nothing.
First, they covered it up and continued the funding of these terrorists using the bank accounts. And that, my friends, is what every American citizen can light a flame on their torch and go marching into Washington by phone call and email and hold them to the wall and say, I know this report, I know these men, I've read it, and I know you know about it, and you have done nothing. What are you going to do now, or do you need to be removed? Because we're going to remove you. Now, before we jump into the Judy Wood, I just wanted to add, I'm looking at the KC-46A Pegasus that was sent up about the possible plane that was used to crash into the buildings. And I can tell you, if you've never looked at it, that looks exactly like the plane that crashed into the World Trade Center. It's gray without any windows. KC-46A Pegasus. It's a refueling plane, and it's a military-grade plane. It is precisely, probably, what crashed into the World Trade Center. But to pick up where you touched upon, Michael J., the Judy Wood book, Where Did the Towers Go? I'm just going to go through some of the some of the points that she raises. Now, everybody is expected to do their own homework, go on YouTube, Google, but these points are the damning evidence that the buildings were taken out through a variety of instruments, a variety of mechanisms, which include spraying on thermite, nanothermite demolition inside the buildings. So there were multiple explosions that the firefighters have also confirmed that Michael Rodriguez, or I think it was Michael Rodriguez, the janitor who was in the building, said he reported an explosion from below. So there are all sorts of anomalies that indicate it was impossible for the government narrative of a couple buildings flying into a couple of planes flying into a building to have caused this demolition. Some of the points that Judy Wood raises are as follows. The jumpers, and you mentioned that. The jumpers out of the building, they jumped because there was an energized launch. They were jumping because they were being cooked because of the technology. The strange technology, the HARP weapon that was used in this attack. The bathtub effect. Why the bathtub? The World Trade Center, the massive bathtub that was used to build the towers, that wasn't cracked, that wasn't destroyed, that wasn't damaged in any way, which would have been damaged had it come down in a conventional demolition. But instead, having come down as a cloud of powder, there was no damage. That builds upon the seismic impact. There was no seismic impact because the building was turned to basic dust. She compares World Trade Center 1 and World Trade Center 7 with the Kingdom seismic strength recording, the Kingdom Dome in Seattle that was destroyed. A conventional controlled demolition, bombs in the building. There were reports of bombs in the building. Firefighters reported this. However, we've now known that firefighters are prohibited from discussing this, or they will lose their fireman's pension. That was one of the things discovered on, I think Susan Lindauer talked a little bit about that. So firemen are forbidden to talk about this or they lose their pension. Not to mention that most of these firemen are dying of cancer because of all the stuff that they breathed in and all the strangeness associated.
All the first responders.
Yeah. Thermite. The claims of thermite being used. A military grade thermite, by the way. Most likely being a controlled demolition that was ran out of Building 7. Building 7, Giuliani's headquarters, his command center, his bunker being used as the control point for destroying the buildings, flipping the switches and pushing the buttons. Then we have the dustification. Now that's huge because the buildings were not just pulverized, but they were turned to dust. It wasn't big chunks of steel and concrete. It was turned into dust. And then the steel, one of the points raised by Judy Wood is, was the steel actually shipped to China?
Yes.
And
India.
China and India. If it was, then it's a crime scene violation because none of that steel was analyzed as it should have. But Judy raises the point, was it really shipped out or was it just dustified? That's still in process and in works. Then we have the first responder testimony. Then we have, the massive debris pile wasn't large enough to contain the actual physical cement and steel. It would have been a lot larger. The radar, imagery that, Judy Wood points to is very strange because you got these massive holes in the ground. Now the other thing that's interesting is the toasted cars. The toasted cars where you have cars that have been flipped over, that have been levitated and flipped over, melted, burned away in very strange ways, leaves being left on the trees despite the cars being flipped over. That's another question because it's impossible to have hurricane grade winds blow a car over and not strip the leaves off of a tree. That's one of the tells that she identifies that it was not winds, it was something else. Some sort of anti-gravity effect. that may be included in the HARP situation.
FEMA was running an operation called Tripod, very close to there too.
Yeah.
And
I'd like to point out that there was some research done by John Hutchinson that duplicated with Tesla frequency interactions. It actually duplicated turning solid steel into dust without any heat, and also levitating a cannonball. You can go on YouTube and look up John Hutchinson and see those experiments duplicated using Tesla frequency weapons.
well, that's what the HARP is.
Yeah.
The HARP is that project. It's 1 million acres in Alaska. It's a microwave technology. It's Tesla technology that they bounce off a satellite. It's 1 million acres in Alaska. Look up HARP. HAARP. There's an interesting movie on the internet called Angels Don't Play This Harp. I highly recommend you watch it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the other thing she begins to raise is the tissue beams and tortilla ships, thinning beams, rusty cars, rustification, rusty beams and pipes, musical chairs, bankers' trust. How a lot of the metal, the beams and the girders were bent and folded like cake batter, like ribbons. It was like they were turned into taffy, and strangely, impossibly, refigured and contorted into these weird knots that is absolutely impossible for a fire that started by kerosene, which jet fuel is. It's impossible for these steel beams and girders to be folded over and twisted up by fires. And it certainly wouldn't have been done by pressure, because they would have snapped. It makes these photographs that Judy Wood has in her book are absolutely mind-blowing, because you see the physical evidence of something that was a technology that no American has seen or been broadcast in today's event, which shows us, again, it wasn't a terrorist attack. It was a completely engineered, planned false flag operation.
And how could you have molten fires burning 5 weeks later in the basement?
Yeah, and that's the other thing. And besides the fact that when the towers turned into dust, they didn't find things that you would have expected to find in a demolition. You didn't find porcelain from the toilets, steel boot toes from the firemen. You didn't find any bodies. Most of the furniture and steel cabinets and filing cabinets were
not one airplane part either.
Yeah.
Not one. If you had 2 planes, you had a couple million airplane parts on the crime scene. Not one piece was found or documented.
The Tesla Hutchison effect that Judy Wood goes into is mentioned here. The technology, the weird technology, and it goes from Nikola Tesla, George Pigott, Edward Leedscombe, Thomas Townsend Brown, Project Winterhaven, John Hutchison. Weird fires, bent beams, jellification, peeling appearance, fusion of dissimilar materials, thinning and aging.
Yeah, and look at the tower. You could almost tell that there was a force being generated down to push the tower, the top part, down on the floors that were hit with the plane or whatever, the explosion.
And
there's something pushing the tower down.
Well, we also remember from the video of the tower's antenna, the radio antenna at the top of the building was disintegrated into thin air as it fell in slow motion. You can see these other pieces of metal in the building as they are falling down. They are disintegrating like an Alka-Seltzer chip in water. That's impossible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the HARP.
So you have the HARP weapon. You've got steel looking like rolled up carpets. And then she goes into a conclusion and summary. And it's an absolutely amazing book, because she is a scientist And Michael J's identification of her YouTube presentation is essential, but she's a scientist that goes in and says, this was impossible. And yes, it's 14 years later, but it's now at a point, we're at a juncture in our society where we have the internet, we have technology, we have alternative radio, internet radio like Veterans Truth Network and other shows. Susan Lindauer has a great show. Carrie Cassidy has a great show. People are coming together to really talk about truth, and we should talk about what we know, what we've experienced, and we're bringing it for really the saving of our country and stopping this out of control murderous operation, which has got us down the wrong path. So Judy Wood's material is pretty powerful. I'll end the 9/11 talk on there unless I'm missing something, and we'll jump right into the Pentagon attacks.
May I say something, LT?
Yeah, please.
What Judy said right off was, this was a psychological operation. And this is really important. This was a wounding of America by a device I mentioned earlier. It's a psychological device that was designed to induce cognitive dissonance, put people in shock, cause them feelings of outrage, and all of that then was channeled and directed in order to bring us into a new era that terror was used to introduce into the psyche of our nation. And let's consider this, that other nations understand that if this nation is willing to do this kind of wickedness to its own people, murder its own citizens, do multiple crimes of mass murder, felonies, thefts, the destruction of our economy, and turn America into a total surveillance police state while allowing people like Michael Chertoff to make millions of dollars off of introducing those terrible body scanners that virtually raped people in the eyes of those that were looking at the naked bodies of people under their clothes. If America is willing to do that to its own people, it was showing the rest of the world, we'll do it to you too.
Absolutely.
We have been brought to a place now where we're beyond our shock. We are in a place of profound and honest indignation. We're looking for justice. We realize we have been totally deceived by what somebody said are weapons of mass deception. And right now we're looking for Americans to stand up and say, this isn't going on anymore. We are saying no to every level of your predations, your predatory mindset to turn America into a police state because you're nothing but a bunch of criminal monsters, and we're going to hold you felonious murderers accountable. And this is what we're doing right here on Fire Support Base Warthog. We are bringing the truth into a place where people are going to be encouraged. Start getting together, start organizing, putting your own fire support base together with 2 or 3 people. Call. We will encourage you. We will pray with you. We will give you the information that you need. But this is Americans calling out to other American citizen soldiers saying, let's recognize we don't have to be codependent with a bunch of psychopaths. They declared war on us. We need to say no more. Okay.
We're calling firemen, policemen too.
That's right.
This was a crime scene. I mean, there were a lot of firemen. 343 firemen died that day.
Well, you know, you had a good, you pointed out well, Scarecrow, about the Jersey girls and some of these women who have reacted with righteous, fury at the deaths of their husbands, and their sons and demanded action. And they were the ones who triggered the 9/11 Commission, report, which was propaganda in itself. But that was the initial impulse behind exposing this lie and this murder and this psyop against Americans. This lie that was engineered were the women who stood up and demanding that the blood of their loved ones crying out to them from the grave was heard, was given justice. And that was the cry, and the slow call was exposing them and bringing that out.
They asked if they could speak to the 9/11 Commission. They were denied. They asked if they could submit a few questions, like maybe 10. They were denied.
Yeah. And that's what every American should be looking at and thinking about and using as a model for their own behavior. They've been lied to.
Those questions still need to be answered. Amen?
Yeah.
Scarecrow?
Amen. Oh, absolutely. There are quite a few people on the 9/11 Commission that are willing to speak out and say that we need a new inquiry into this because their investigation was blocked. And I think Max Cleland, he quit and walked away from it because he said this is just absolute nonsense. They're not going to let us get to the truth. He resigned, walked away, disgruntled, because he knew it was a joke. It was all run through the White House. Condoleezza Rice was looking for a favor from one of her friends, Mr. Philip Zalkow. He's a professor at the University of Virginia. He had co-authored a book with Condoleezza just prior to this, and that's why he was brought in. And he's a neocon Jew, and he was given charge of everything: what was going to be in, what was not going to be in, what was accepted. The Jersey girls were denied.
Let me jump in there. I want to start a new conversation. I want to go in the direction of the Pentagon. And the 9/11 Commission report that was done, one of the people on that Commission report, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the Navy or Army guys who was at the Pentagon in the skiff that was destroyed by the 9/11 attack. He was put on the 9/11 Commission to participate in that investigation. And that takes us to the 9/11 hit on the Pentagon. Barbara Honegger has done an astounding work in Behind the Smoke Curtain, where she goes moment by moment, time frame by time frame of the Pentagon attack. And the distillation of her material is that it was probably a drone that was dressed up as a commercial airline, painted with a red stripe and white, so it would look like a plane, but it wasn't. It was a drone a drone explosive missile that crashed into the building, that crashed into the very same spot of the Pentagon building that was reinforced previously for a plane hit or a missile hit, which makes it very suspicious.
And it hit the budget department. It hit the place where auditors were tracking the money supply, the missing money from the true $0.3 trillion. Those auditors were all killed, and the Pentagon, that portion of the Pentagon was destroyed. And Donald Rumsfeld, the day before on 9/11, had announced that $2.3 trillion were missing from the Pentagon. And Dov Zakheim. Rumsfeld was from Capitol Hill the afternoon prior, and said that he would be back with full disclosure. That before he left, he told Congress that the preliminary figures, we could not find $2.3 trillion. And I think he said, I'll be back ASAP with the full report. We are working diligently, and I have the best team of investigators I can have. I can put together to resolve this mystery. The next day, they're dead. The next day, that portion of the Pentagon is destroyed by what is perceived to be a plane, but in actuality, and according to the forensic evidence,
was a missile and or a drone and explosives that were set in the Pentagon. Now that should cause every person who's worn the uniform, present and past and future, to say, what explosions occurred inside the Pentagon? What was wired? What devices could possibly have been put into the Pentagon for explosions to have occurred, as corroborated by that Army gal who was at her computer at the time when she turned her computer on and said she heard all the explosions at that point hit. And she walked out of the hole in the Pentagon without any burning fuel around her. So it was impossible for it to be a plane. Now I know for a fact because I drove by the Pentagon the next day when I was going to Catholic University. I just started my doctorate, and there wasn't anything except a tarp hanging over the hole. There was no wreckage. There was no burned grass. There was no cordoned off crime scene yellow tape. There was nothing but a blue tarp hanging over the Pentagon.
There was just a small hole there, and then the building collapsed later like a V came down inside there.
That's right.
Opened up, but the initial hit was a small hole, and it went through 3 rings.
That's right.
And the lady's name is April Gallup too. If anybody would like to look her up, she walked out of her office in shock with a baby still in her baby son was still in his car seat. That she had taken him to work and hadn't taken him to the nursery yet. The baby was sleeping in his car seat under her desk. It blew her out of her seat and put her on the ground. The desk protected her and the baby, and she walked out with the baby in her arm through the hole that supposedly a plane went into.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is, and I meant to touch on this before, and Michael J., maybe you can jump in. I had asked Michael, and the question had come, well, what did Judy Wood, for example, when she did all this analysis, and I'm interested to ask the same thing of Barbara Onager, what did Judy Wood do legally? What did she do with her material? She obviously took it to political, legal authorities. I would hope filed some sort of a legal action. What actually happened when she took her material forward? I know what happened when I took my material forward. I was ignored completely and absolutely by every military and political representative of this country, which shows me they completely abandoned their oath. So they have no care or concern for the Constitution. Therefore, they have no legal authority over anyone who has sworn an oath to the Constitution. They've surrendered and abandoned their duty as military political leaders, and they are not to be respected, and they are not to be obeyed in any way, shape, or form. That was the effect on me psychologically when I was presenting government bodies and actors and military actors, not to mention media. Everybody at Fox News knew about this, but all of them refused to do anything about it. And Scarecrow, you were there firsthand. You saw the mail that was being sent out and the absence of it coming back in. But the curiosity is what happened to Judy Wood. Michael, maybe you can pick up on that. When you had told me she had an interesting conversation with a judge who said, right, do you have a death wish?
Yes, she brought a lawsuit against the NIST, that is the 9/11 Commission scientific report, the NIST report. They denied the lawsuit, so she took it up on appeal to the next federal court. And that federal judge asked her, Dr. Woods, do you have a death wish?
Well, some things are worth dying for. Some things are worth standing for. Some things are worth standing up and forsaking everything else around you, your house, your home, your material comforts, your reputation, because all of that is passing in the wind. All of that is worthless because it's of this world. The only thing that matters is your eternal soul and appearing before your maker and saying, I've fought the good fight. I've spoken the truth. I've done everything I can to make known the lies and the injustice where I found them in my particular walk of life. Those are the things that we will be held to account for. What we knew and what we did with it. To whom much is given, much shall be expected. And the only thing that matters is to hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the kingdom prepared for you before the foundations of the world." And the last thing that anyone wants to hear, but we're telling them right now, this is the line in the sand, is, "Depart from me, ye who do iniquity. I never knew you." Anyone who knows about this information, who hears about it now, who doesn't do something with it, doesn't advance it, doesn't pray for it, doesn't push it up, doesn't share it, but sticks their head in the sand. I don't care if you're a military person or a politician or a media person or an average citizen that's retired, swinging on a hammock or in a wheelchair or in a rocking chair. You have a duty to make this truth known. And anyone who doesn't, well, you'll be held account by a higher power than what exists here. But there are some things worth dying for. So we need to pick up the mantle where Judy Wood and others perhaps have dropped it and continue to carry it forward.
You know, brother, the Word of God asks this question: when the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? People are given opportunities to grow in the grace of a greater responsibility. A lot of people are saying, well, what can I do? But if you're really looking for the answer, you're going to get that answer. The Lord said, "Seek and you shall find." It's not like we're just spitting into the wind here. America right now is at risk more than any other time in her history. We've got hundreds and thousands of military vehicles. We've got psychological operations that are turning our policemen into felons, murderers, and police state thugs. We've got our military controlled by people who were asked a question, will you be willing to fire on American citizens? If they say yes, they could stay in the military. The ones that said no were thrown out. Our nation is at risk at every level. And we've got moral compromise and corruption by people who want to keep their job, want to exercise power over others, want to sell America down into the pit of total economic collapse, because they are banksters seduced by the love of money, and the only people that can make a difference are people that still are experiencing the grace of having a functioning conscience. These are the people we're calling. This is about standing in the gap and saying, America, the real America, your family, your children and grandchildren are worth fighting for. But you have to make a decision. That's what Fire Support Base Warthog is about. We are recognizing that they declared war against everything precious, everything that our ancestors thought was right, everything we grew up with when we were able to sing "God Bless America" in our school assemblies and "My Country 'Tis of Thee." That America is being destroyed right in front of us, and the only person that, we're really responsible for is the one we see in the mirror and the people we find around us that we can encourage, because we have a love for America that we're not going to let it go.
And that is a powerful point of passion, because one of the things I think a lot of people struggle with is the righteous anger and the righteous indignation, the emotions that they feel as a result of this. A lot of people, and Christians in particular, perhaps struggle with, what do I do with all this energy? Because they've been psyoped into believing that they should be as meek and silent and quiet as lambs. I'll say castrated lambs. And they don't know how to process or what the right response is. And I would say the right response is the response of David going against the bear and the lion that attacked his herd, that attacked his sheep. David stood up and destroyed the bear, destroyed the lion. David stood up and walked onto the field of battle against a giant where every other military man, refused to even raise his eyes against the enemy. David walked forth, not in his own strength, not in his own skill, but stepped onto that field and trusted that the 5 stones in his bag would meet their mark and take out Goliath and his 4 brothers. He stood up, and the power and the faith that he had in his God to guide his hand through the stones, and it met its mark on Goliath and took him down. That is the same spirit that we all step out with, is to put ourselves into the fight. And there's a righteous power of being angry, and it should not be squelched. It should not be ran away from. It should be understood like the anger a fireman feels by looking at a fire that's about to devour his neighbor's home. There's the anger a surgeon feels by looking at a disease or a gangrene that is eating up the good, healthy tissue. You cut it out. You destroy it. You extinguish it. You go on the attack. You go on the assault, not flailing emotional crazy, but with a very disciplined, surgical, objective-oriented posture. And we need to go into this issue of the 9/11 material and the evidence and the facts and the testimony and the expertise that's been provided by people like Judy Wood, Barbara Honegger, Susan Lindauer, Richard Gage, Alan Zabrowski, Chris Bolin, all of these people who have been pathfinders in this material. We need to get behind them, and also embrace in ourselves that it is right and good that we are angry at wickedness and lies. What does every person feel when someone steps up to their face and tells them a bold-faced lie and expects them to believe it? Not only expects them to believe it, but bullies them to try and get them to believe it, threatens them to try and believe a lie. What is your response if someone steps up to you and tells you a lie that you know is absolutely a lie, and then tries to say, well, if you don't believe this, then you're a conspiracy theorist, or you're a racist, or you're an anti-Semite, or all that? If you know it's a lie and they're trying to get you to believe a lie, what is your response? Your response is anger and fury and outrage, and you must go on the attack to put that liar and that lie on the retreat. You don't tolerate it. You don't make it an equal opinion as if, well, we're all entitled to our all opinions. No, a lie is a lie is a lie. And you attack lies. You destroy lies. You put them on the retreat. You shame them. And you inoculate your fellow human beings to not be entrapped by them, to not be poisoned by them. Lies are poison. And this country has suffered the bullying, the browbeating, brainwashing psyop of being lied to for the past 14 years. And it's time for people to gird up their loins as men and say, I will not allow this lie anymore to bounce around in my mental computer. I will not allow it to be perpetrated as the truth. That's why we're doing this work. We're bringing together the best minds and the best material and the best subject to simply encapsulate what we know that happened on September 11th. Because that was, as Michael J. said, the catalyst that has sent us on this global hegemony empire building crusade for the past 14 years. Now the liars and the traitors and the foreign agents from the Zionist Mossad Israel operation all believed that this was going to evaporate as the planes evaporated into the building. They thought there was never going to be an inquiry. They thought no one was going to do the math. They thought no one was going to do the physics involved to determine that everything was false. They didn't expect Rebecca Roth to put out a book and build upon some of the material that shows clearly and plainly that the planes could never have made cell phone calls at that altitude. And every other piece of evidence that we've now discovered, the perpetrators of this act never expected it to happen. They never expected that all of this would be coming. It's taken 14 years, but it's coming, and it's only going to get bigger and more bolder, and it is going to spread into the rest of the population because people are smart. They're beginning to catch on. The brainwashing is washing away. The trauma, the cognitive dissonance is slowly being bled out of them. They're beginning to put the pieces together. They're beginning to see the jigsaw puzzle forms a very clear picture. And what they do with it, that's where we're stepping in to develop the language, the press releases, the flyers. And Michael J., I want you to talk about the September 11th attack or the September 11th events that are upcoming. That is one.
Thank you.
That's a one battle that everybody listening to this program needs to mark on their calendar. You go into your community at the September 11th effect, the September 11th, any events that you may have going on in your community, and you take a flyer from this website discussing shell game, and you take it and you hand it out. We're going to have it up on the website, but that is your opportunity. Step into that fight, step into that battle space, and start spreading the truth to people who are gathering to discuss and mourn the 9/11 events, because they need to be met with the truth.
Our men and our women in this war were offered on an altar of deception and murder, and they gave their lives based on lies and deception and a terrible act of treason against this whole nation, and an act of unlawful war against these other nations that they were committed on to destroying because of the parasitic nature of America's alignment with a brutal, hate-filled Nazi regime that calls itself the Israel. They are not the Israel of God. If you know your Bible, the Word of God says a Jew is not one who is outwardly a Jew, but who is inwardly circumcised in his heart, walking in the fear of God and the faith of Abraham. And the Lord said to those people who thought they were Jews, you are not of your father Abraham. Now, the reality is we are being given truth, and the truth is the only thing that can set anybody free. We're being given and entrusted with the truth. We're going to be presenting an opportunity for people to cut and paste something off the website that Scott mentioned earlier, so that you can take it to a printer or print it on your own computer printer and hand it out in your 9/11 ceremonies, your 9/11 events locally, because we need people to understand that that act of war is an ongoing, pervasive aggression against the real America, accomplished against us by liars. I know we're coming up against it. I want to thank Veterans Truth Network. I want to thank Scarecrow, Lieutenant Bennett, and Chip. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to stand in the gap, because America is worth it.
It is. And we are patriots. We are former military men who've sworn an oath that still are military men, that are still oath keepers, that are still patriots. And we will never surrender this country or surrender the truth to liars or the abusers of men or the humanists or the atheists that are up there propagating this fantasy of demonic corruption and perversion, and this fantasy of the Christian Zionist destiny, and the false religious belief that Christians need to give a absolute open acceptance of everything that the Israeli Zionist government performs. That has been the psyop against this country for the last 100 years. And it's time for the truth to be known, and that to be shrugged off like the leprosy that it is. So this is nothing to do with being what some people will try and countermeasure it with by being, well, you're an anti-Semite, or you're anti-Catholic, or you're that. We're not anti-anything. We are pro-God, pro-truth, and pro-American. We are pro-constitutionalist. This has nothing to do with anything other than the lies and the people who have been lying against our country since September 11th, 2001. And we're going to continue to expose it. We're not going to retreat. We're not going to back down. We are going to speak this until our dying breath, or until God takes us up. But every human being every person listening to the show that's aware of it needs to mark on their calendar the September 11th event. Research in your community what's going on, research in your church what's going on, and appear at the event with flyers in hand to spread the word that people need to be aware of what we're doing here. They need to be aware of shell game. They need to be educated in order to begin to be better citizens. We've got a short time ahead. Let me pass it on to you, Scarecrow, and then I'll pass it back for a shutdown.
Yeah, I'm briefly, I'd like to say it's not about left or right. It's about right and